We're not going to start with team reviews. We're actually going to start with a little infographic that a group of us just posted on Self Arena. If it hasn't been posted now, it's going to be posted in the next few minutes. And you can see that infographic up in the live stream. Basically, it's an attempt to digest the meta in a way that is a little bit easier. This is a particularly complex meta and its relationships, and the counters are pretty strange here, and some of the shields will swing it a little bit. I've attempted to make, I guess, 5 main groups: the fire types, Lucario, Altaria, steel types with Bastiodon and Steelix, somewhat interchangeable, and then you have Lapras. I guess the 6th group would be the Misfits with Bronzong and Flygon. They're not exactly interchangeable, they just have different matchups. So I guess I'll just leave it open. We'll have a little bit of discussion, and we'll just see where this goes. Who wants to start? Polly,
Yeah.
you want to start?
Sure. I'm almost done with this post if someone else wants to
Oh, okay.
go first. Yeah.
So Gots, what do you think? Since you were, building these spreadsheets from the beginning, you kind of discovered Bronzong a little bit. What do you think about generally infographic? How would you build your team off of what you know so far?
Well, you definitely want like the core and a fire type. I think there's only really flex in the 6th spot right now.
Yeah, I mean, so far, I think the must-haves are definitely Lucario in this case. Some people have talked a little bit about swapping Lucario with Blaziken. There's a bit of a risk there, and it doesn't quite do the same job against Bastiodon. I think Lucario is a little bit more impressive on Bastiodon than Blaziken
Lucario
is.
picks up a few other like Kingdra and does better versus Lapras than Blaziken.
Yeah. What we've seen so far, as far as bulk goes, Bastiodon and Lapras, to some extent Altaria, are sort of defining everything else. And the main reason why Lucario is so prevalent is because he hard counters both Lapras and Bastiodon. I mean, if you get stuck with your Lapras against a Lucario or your Bastiodon against a Lucario, unless they don't have shields, it's pretty much game over. At least with Bastiodon it is. I don't think Lapras can even pull it off with an unshielded Lucario, can it?
I doubt it. Pup would come out so fast versus Lapras.
Yeah.
Even shield advantage on Lapras, I don't think it can win.
Yeah. So with that, Lucario is the number one counter to the bulkiest options, save Altaria, which to so if you reverse counterclockwise in the graphic, you'll kind of see that the fire types all pretty much hard counter Lucario in different ways. Charizard single resists all of Lucario's fighting type moves, even though he's glassy. He can tank counter a little bit better than most. And then, of course, he's hitting super effective with Fire Spin. Will absolutely nuke it with Blast Burn, and it's not like he doesn't do a lot of damage with Dragon Claw either, if he gets a failed shield bait in. Alolan Marowak is pretty interesting because he straight up walls any of Lucario's fighting type moves. The only thing is Lucario does have Shadow Ball, which will pretty much nuke Marowak because of the ghost typing. So that's just something to consider there. Torkoal is one of the few, I think it's the only fire type in this graphic that can beat Lucario at a shield disadvantage. So it can tank Shadow Ball because it's not a particularly glassy stat distribution. and it only takes neutral from Shadow Ball. And then, of course, it does super effective fire spin damage, and it doesn't even need to do a charge move against Lucario to beat it.
Yeah.
So,
Torkoal
and then, of
really
course,
just wants better charge moves to be, and it'd be good in everything.
yeah.
The
Man,
lack
if
of
Torkoal
charge
got like a really good fast charging fire charge move, it'd be pretty damn impressive. But because it has to rely on fire spin and earthquake, it's somewhat gimmicky. Of all the fire types, it's probably going to be the least prevalent. And then you of course have Blaziken, which I hesitated a little bit to even put it in the fire group per se, because it's not even running fire type moves. It's just it happens to counter a lot of the same things, and it happens to be countered by a lot of the same things.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that Blaziken beats that isn't also beaten by like Torkoal or Charizard or something like that.
Right.
Other than Bastiodon.
Yes. So that comes to the big ticket item. Before we go into that Bastiodon, I do kind of want to talk about the relationship between the fire types. They all have their merits, as we kind of just glazed over. I think Gots, you and I were talking about Alolan Marowak even in freestyle meta yesterday.
Yeah,
with
he does
Deoxys
really good work in freestyle right now with Medicham and Deoxys Defense coming up.
Yeah.
And he's not a complete wash versus Tropius.
Yeah. So, yeah, Alolan Marowak is just a solid choice, and they all have trade-offs. Like Charizard on one hand can beat Blaziken pretty handily. He can actually nuke Lapras if he can slip in a Blast Burn. Generally, he does lose, of course. He doesn't do awful if he can spam a couple Dragon Claws into an Altaria, and he beats Steelix. Whereas, say, Alolan Marowak can beat Charizard and Blaziken, but he doesn't do well at all against like Bastiodon, for example, or even Steelix to most extent. And,
Well, he does better versus Lucario and Bastiodon if he packs Rock Smash.
Yeah.
And there's actually an interesting inverse there. If you run him with Rock Smash, he plays more like a fire type. If you run him with Hex, he plays more like an anti-fire type.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the interesting thing about him, the Rock Smash and Hex difference. I guess a lot of us were playing it out, and the trade-offs were with Hex seemed a little bit more favorable, because although you do come closer to trading with Bastiodon, it isn't quite a guaranteed win, so it doesn't really turn it into a counter. It just makes it very difficult for Bastiodon to switch in, and well, it just won't win.
Right. The only thing it truly counters with Rock Smash is Lucario, Blaziken, and Alolan Dugtrio.
Yeah.
But Hex would also get Blaziken, and Hex picks up a Kingdra fight, the Bronzong fight, Charizard, and a Metagross if you happen to, which is kind of important for locals.
Yeah. And Hex still beats Lucario, though, right?
Only with a shield.
At least in my experience. With a shield beat. So the problem with Hex, I suppose, is it deals not super effective damage, or is it neutral against Lucario's fighting?
Versus Lucario.
Yeah, so it'd be neutral damage. The advantage, of course, is that you can spam Bone Club a little bit better at the expense of a little bit of damage. So yeah, the fire types, they have kind of interesting relationships. The Torkoal, Alolan Marowak matchup wasn't clear cut. It just depended a little bit on shields and baiting and things of that nature. What's represented in the graph, though, is mostly Hex because of the Charizard and Blaziken trade-off. That's what we went with, but not to discard Rock Smash as a viable moveset at all.
Just to point this one out, even if Lucario gets the proper power-up punch shield bait, it still only wins by 2 HP versus a Hex.
Yeah. So it comes really down to IVs too. I'm assuming.
Yeah, if you have just either a breakpoint on Hex, which I don't know if that's possible, or if you just get to squeeze a little extra damage out of Bone Club, you'll KO Lucario before it gets its Shadow Ball.
Right. What if they both botch the shield bait? I guess the wing goes to Marowak in that case.
Marowak just wants to Bone Club, actually.
Yeah.
It does. Lucario's so glassy, it can't really take a Bone Club effect.
Yeah. So it really hinges on whether a Lucario user can bait in a shield, Shadow Ball. That's what it comes down to.
Right. Or just always shield the first one, and then you've basically left Lucario dead in the water.
Right. And the thing about Marowak, I guess it was surprising to me. I don't know if it's going to be surprising to other people. Is he is kind of bulky. He's got the right stat distribution for PvP. It's just that his moveset is pretty low damage output with Bone Club, and then Shadow Ball is a very good move for PvP, but it takes a little bit longer to charge than. So he's kind of flipping back and forth between those two. And then the stuff that hits him hard just hits him, really nukes him, like Shadow Ball. Or Earthquake, for that matter. So he's got kind of a weird place in that a lot of the stuff that hits him hard is just going to pretty much wipe him out. Except Crunch. Crunch doesn't quite. I think it does like a third of his HP or something like that.
Crunch isn't the best charge move, but it's serviceable in those that have.
Yeah. Steelix mainly here. So
I think that's the only one that even uses it in Great League would be Steelix.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. Well, anyway, so that's just the basics on the fire types. I don't really think we're gonna see much more than this. There is some talk early on about like the Monferno Infernape duo, Cumbuscan. You know, Gots can talk a little bit more about this because he was a lot more involved in the early discussions, but the general consensus is they don't do a better job at what these other four already do.
Now, basically, Monferno and Infernape are just terrible Blazikens.
Yeah.
I don't think they pick up a single fight over Blaziken, and they just do worse all around.
Yeah, because they're depending on Rock Smash and Fire Spin.
Infernape does Fire Spin and Rock Smash, yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of the problem. If you had counter, maybe it'd be a little bit different. But Rock Smash is just not a very good move. So situationally, it'll help.
Infernape gets Frostlass if that's a concern at all.
Yeah.
But Charizard would deal with Frostlass just fine as long as shields are in play.
For sure. So, I guess this kind of transitions into the Rock Steel group or Ground Steel group. I mean, it's just Steelix is the ground, and then Bastiodon being the rock. Of those fire types, the only thing that really counters both of them would be Blaziken, right? So you have Bastiodon being the highest for sure in Kingdom meta at least, rocking the highest defense stat of the meta right now with his rock and steel typing. And then you have Steelix, which is somewhat of a budget version of Bastiodon just because of similar matchups. He's not as oppressive as Bastiodon is against Altaria, but he still he still does a lot of the similar things, and he beats Bastiodon quite well, I might add. Even with Flamethrower, he can tank it pretty well.
Yeah, and the main drawback is that you lose even worse to Lapras.
Yeah.
And Charizard is a wash.
Yeah.
But you don't lose as hard to Flygon, if that's good.
Yeah. So there's some, I guess, viability in maybe running both as sort of alternates to your Altaria counter, say. If you didn't want to depend on Lapras, or say if your Lapras didn't have Ice Beam and you were a little bit iffy about Altaria, I could conceive of you know, a team running both Steelix and Bastiodon in the same six. But I don't think you'd be seeing much of those in the same three. So
No, probably
it
not.
would be
And
more
then
of
you
a one
really
or
got
the
to
other.
worry about both Charizard and Blaziken showing up.
Yeah.
Blaziken more so, because Bastiodon can get Charizard.
Yeah. Yeah, Bastiodon just laughs at Charizard if you've seen that matchup. I mean, what is he doing, like 27 damage every single time?
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. That double super effective stab with Smackdown does Charizard no favors.
No, I think if
So-
Charizard sneaks through a Blast Burn, it's not as one-sided as you think, but
Yeah,
it's still not a fight Charizard can.
it's like a third, right? Roughly a third of his HP. to take
Yeah,
out.
the no shield fight from 0-0 ends at a 715 battle ranking, which
Yeah.
I mean that's not insignificant, but it's still not something you want to leave Charizard in versus.
Right. So anyway, the Steelix, talked a little bit about it, but the Steelix matchup with Bastiodon was pretty interesting. I've done a little bit of testing so far. These two, Earthquake just completely destroys Bastiodon. The double super effective stab and Earthquake is as good as it is. Just absolutely ruins Bastiodon's day. But it doesn't really need to shield bait, with Crunch. It'll help it a little bit. But being able to resist Smackdown so well definitely helps Steelix in that matchup. The problem is, as you guys probably seen by now through Tempest, is that Steelix doesn't do as well as it should possibly against Altaria, because it doesn't really have anything to hit it super effective with. Or
Well,
even
it really
neutral.
wants
Well,
Heavy
do
Slam
neutral crunch.
versus Altaria.
It really wants what?
Heavy Slam. With Heavy Slam, it does a lot better
Yeah.
because it can just hit harder neutrally. But I'm not sure if Crunch is necessary in Kingdom Cup, but it sure helps with the shield baits over Heavy.
Yeah. So I guess we can move on to Altaria, since we've been talking about it already. If you thought that Ice and Steel, to a certain extent, the rock types that are prevalent here, we're going to keep Altaria in check, I just think again. Because with the rise of fire types, what happens with Altaria? Altaria straight up counters and laughs at any of the fire types. It can basically tank. It can even take a blast burn if it needs to. It does pretty well against Lucario. And because the Lapras is running water gun so much, it goes quite even with it unless it's using Ice Beam. So Altaria once again has become a staple to the Theme Cup meta.
Yeah, it was kind of sad to see Altaria rise so much in Tempest, because we all figured that one was going to keep Altaria out.
Yeah.
And then the first couple days, we were just like, okay, no, Altaria can't play because it's all Bastiodon and heavy steel types. And then we just realized that none of them outside of Bastiodon were good. I mean, Steelix is decent, but I don't think you bring it over Bastiodon, even to check Altaria. I think you bring a flex spot in that last slot.
Yeah, I mean, do you envision a team, a tournament winning team without an Altaria on it?
I think you could swap Altaria for Skarmory and do almost as good, but I think it'll be really hard to win without Altaria.
Right. Yeah, and Skarmory does a little bit better against Bastiodon, but then with Skarmory you lose the fire matchups, or at least you don't
You're
do anywhere
neutral
near as
on
well.
Charizard, basically, instead of winning that one easily. You
Yeah.
still beat Blaziken. You lose to Torkoal in a tie, and Alolan Marowak is a tie as well. So
Yeah.
you lose basically certainty, but you pick up the Bronzong fight, if that's a concern. You lose outright to Lucario, so that's not even a decision anymore. But you're no longer weak to Frostlass in a one shield fight or even a zero shield fight. And that's kind of a wild card pick that you just got to be prepared for.
Frostless.
Yeah, it's so weird because it does so well, but at the same point in time, it does so bad. It's just kind of one of those, like, if it gets in the right situation, you're just going to lose to it, and there's probably not much you can do.
So I actually have that posted up now, so it should be good.
Okay, so probably just posted that
Can you throw a link
onto
in
Self
the
Arena?
Yeah,
live stream chat?
yeah, in the live chat, definitely. So we were talking about Frostlass, and you guys brought up some good points. I think it's interesting how Frostlass could do really well if shields could be down more regularly in Kingdom. But unlike in some of the other Cup formats that we played, shield usage is a bit unpredictable. And Frostlass really needs those shields to be out of the way to really take advantage of a few of its better matchups, like Lucario, for example, or Bronzong.
Right. Or you could always just bring Frostlass in on a baited switch into something it really wants to counter, like an Altaria that
Exactly, yeah.
or a Flygon or something like that, where it's just gonna wreck, and then just carry that momentum into the next target.
Yeah. The problem with Frostless, of course, if you get stuck with the wrong thing, and not only does it die, but it faints really, really quickly. And if you're starting to bring in weird off-meta choices, chances are Frostless doesn't do so well. So,
right, yeah, it's definitely not
yeah.
something you pack a 5-man team of odd choices. It's you go with the core 4, a fire type, and Frostlass as a coverage for fixing up your Altaria or something.
Yeah. Yeah, so what are the core 4? Because you guys were talking about that in the Kingdom discussion. Had an acronym for it, I think, too.
Yeah, it's been nicknamed Ball, and some people actually want to nickname it Balls, but the 5th pick is weird. But the main one is Bastiodon for the B, Altaria for the A, and the 2 L's are Lapras and Lucario. I just don't see any major winning team without those 4.
Yeah.
And they just complement each other so well. I mean, the number of cores you're able to build, it's a tremendous amount of flexibility that those 4 can provide with just their pairings. And that really leaves like 2 really open-ended sort of flex spots for anyone that's team building to play around with.
The only Pokemon that beats both Altaria and Lapras is Bronzong in the entire Cup. Like, not even just the meta. Every Pokemon that's physically capable of being in Kingdom Cup, only one beats both Lapras and
Bronzong.
Yeah.
So, for those of you that are interested, the link that we posted in live stream chat has, I guess, a digested version of this infographic. And then we initially had a version of this that included Bronzong and Flygon as far as like the arrows and counters relationship. That was just so incredibly cluttered that we opted best to leave them out as misfits and just talk about them, it's a pretty quick line. But the general idea is that they have inverse relationships to each other for the most part. So like while Flygon does a really good job countering Steelix and Bastiodon, Bronzong loses to those. And where Flygon loses very handily to Altaria, Bronzong is able to squeeze out a win against Altaria. It's not like Bastiodon Altaria matchup by any means, but he does counter it reliably. And then while Lapras beats Flygon pretty handily, Bronzong gets to beat Lapras. So it's kind of like a weird relationship that they have going on here. The only added bonus that Bronzong has that Flygon not so much is that it really counters Blaziken very, very well. I think it's 5 Confusions that it takes to beat a Blaziken.
Neither Pokemon gets to charge move in that fight at all.
Yeah.
They're just...
Yeah. So what's awesome about that is at the end of it, you have a fully charged Heavy Slam. You can just fire it off at whatever's next. So that's
you're
pretty
still
good.
Around half health or so because you're taking neutral from counter.
Yeah. And neutral from counter is nothing to sneeze at, but it's still pretty good with Blaziken.
Better than taking quad. Or
for sure.
Even effective.
Yeah. So that's kind of where Bronzong and Flygon fit in. I could definitely see teams winning tournament teams with those and without those. We've characterized those spots as flex spots. They're not necessarily in the main core, but they're absolutely going to be prevalent in winning teams. And you better watch out for them and be familiar with those matchups for sure.
Yeah, I think if your team is, if your meta is more heavy into Blaziken, Bronzong will win you the game. If your meta is more heavy into Charizard, you probably want to stray away from Bronzong because that matchup is really iffy.
Yeah.
But Flygon, although Flygon's matchup with Charizard is really iffy too, but with a bit of energy advantage, Flygon can easily win the Charizard match with just Dragon.
Right. Which is pretty common in Flygon, having an energy advantage. Not that you would switch a Charizard necessarily into a Flygon, but his charge moves, they go so fast, and they charge much faster than Fire Spin with Mudshot. So although they both have Dragon Claw, Mudshot is just charging a little bit faster, so it can get that edge. And even Earthquake hits with not super effective. It hits Charizard pretty hard. As far as
it's nothing to sneeze at. Charizard doesn't appreciate taking an Earthquake.
Yeah.
But more often than not, it'll just take Dragon Claws.
Yeah.
They'll get the job done.
So.
And you do have
and
to
then
watch
I guess that
out
leaves
for
us
Stone Edge from Flygon.
Yeah.
I don't
that's
think
the
it's
other
going to
thing.
be very common.
The charge moves. So we're saying Dragon Claw and Earthquake is the way to go, right? But it's not like you can discard the threat of the other charge moves. So, walk us through it a little bit.
The main draw to Stone Edge is Charizard and Lapras. A lot of times a Lapras will just not take a shield versus Flygon because it's expecting Edge Claw or a Earthquake Claw.
Right.
And if you nail a Lapras with a Stone Edge, that's a win right there.
Yeah.
There's just no way Lapras comes back from that.
Right. Yeah, Flygon hits pretty hard. He's glassy, but because of his glassiness, he has a pretty high attack stat. So
yeah, it's just
even without stab,
you sacrifice the Bastiodon match. Like it is almost a lose to Flygon when you don't run Earthquake. Like you're winning by a hair's breadth versus Bastiodon. And other than that, there's not much difference realistically across the board. It's just mainly in the Charizard and Lapras and Bastiodon fight where those primary differences lie.
Well, speaking of Lapras, that's another kind of a headache. At least there isn't a consensus right now on which moves to run. There's definitely a consensus on Water Gun over Ice Shard. at least you don't necessarily need a legacy this time around to use Lapras effectively, since most of the time you're going to be using Water Gun and Surf. Some people will still be using Ice Shard, so it's something to keep in mind. But Water Gun does a lot better against the broader spectrum. So you have
Ice
Water
Shard,
Gun and Surf, which you're using most of the time. And then what were you going to say?
Ice Shard charges Surfs faster, but the
Yeah.
problem is you're sacrificing neutral damage on Lucario and Bastiodon and Blaziken. Like Ice Shard takes a Blaziken tie to a Blaziken complete loss. Like you will just get shredded by Blaziken running Ice Shard.
Right.
And I think the Bronzong match is better in Bronzong's favor running Ice Shard. I know Lucario's an even worse match for you running Ice Shard. Charizard's about like Lapras can beat Charizard every time from a 0-0 start with Ice Shard compared to Water Gun. Charizard doesn't even get time to get a second charge move off because the Surfs come out that much faster. And you'll just completely destroy Altaria and Flygons. So there is still some room for an Ice Shard Lapras, but sacrificing the Bastiodon and the Blaziken match is just really iffy, in my opinion.
Yeah. And doesn't it do well? A lot better against the mirror to have Water Gun, since
Yep.
Ice Shard is doing
Ice Shard will be
not
double
super effective.
resisted. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't even think Ice Shard Dragon Pulse would cover enough damage to make up.
Yeah.
Yeah, the three, like Got said, the Blaziken matchup and then the mirror. I mean, those are really the two big things you're losing by running Ice Shard over Water Gun. You also lose the one shield Bastiodon scenario, but it's really the Blaziken and the mirror. I think is going to be the most common issue. Identifying that fast move as Ice Shard means that that's one less counter for Lapras that you have to worry about, or tie situation that you have to worry about if you're using, say, even Water Gun Surf, and maybe you don't even have Dragon Pulse, maybe you have Ice Beam, or just running the non-legacy Water Gun version. Now you win that mirror if they're running Ice Shard. So at that point, you only have to worry about their Lucario, or maybe their Bronzong if they have a Bronzong on their team. I think the team considerations for someone who wants to run Ice Shard Lapras, those are more important because I think you have to make sure you cover those matchups, in particular the Lapras mirror, Water Gun mirror.
Yep,
for sure. So that kind of brings us to the charge moves. I mean, I think even though there's some niche to running Ice Shard, most of the time you talk to people, Water Gun is agreed as the best move, fast move. But it's in the charge moves where things get a little bit dicey. So Surf, obviously, you're going to need Surf on Lapras, no matter what. If you're going to have two charge moves, best if it's Legacy, Dragon Pulse, or Ice Beam. After that, things start to get a little bit hairy because although Dragon Pulse gives favorable matchups against the Mirror and Kingdra, you do sacrifice a more reliable win against Altaria. So Ice Beam gives a much better win against Altaria, and it also does a little bit better against Flygon, even though you don't need necessarily Dragon Pulse to beat Flygon. And then, of course, I don't know if I mentioned it already, but the Mirror with Lapras is a pretty big ticket. So,
Yeah,
what do you think? What would you recommend to most people?
Statistically, Dragon Pulse is the superior move. Just when you're talking about what beats Lapras in a purely Lapras's advantage set, so Lapras wins the shield bait, and it beats your opponent's shield bait if they have one. Dragon Pulse has two targets that beat Lapras consistently without care, and that's Lucario and Abomasnow. And Bronzong is the third who can sometimes always check Lapras. Whereas Ice Beam will lose to Kingdra, it'll lose to Lapras itself, running a Dragon Pulse, and it will. There's a few other like off meta things that like Celio and stuff like that that will be an Ice Beam Lapras.
Yeah, Celio. I don't foresee a lot of Celio in meta teams, but
I really don't.
definitely see them in some of these oddball teams.
I could see somebody who ran Celio in Tempest who wants to save on Dust, subbing in as thinking it's basically a Lapras Light, but it's just really not. Body Slam just isn't the best move in this moveset. Kingdom Cup.
Yeah, I think there's just too much steel and rock, that's going to be taking not very effective damage from that body slam spam that Celio kind of relied on in Tempest.
For sure, but it does pick up a noticeable win versus Lapras.
Mm-hmm.
Is it enough to put it in your 6? Probably not. But somebody will run it, so you need to be aware.
And speaking of, sort of things that are comparable to Lapras in terms of matchup coverage, I think Dragonair is actually pretty interesting because it's able to spam that Aqua Tail very similar to how Lapras just spams Surf in this meta. And the matchup coverages overlap quite a bit with a few exceptions.
Steelix would be the most notable exception in that fight. Mm-hmm. Whereas Lapras can beat Steelix, Dragonair has no chance. Altaria, Dragonair can maybe tie, but even then it's iffy. But it does beat Lapras in a favorable shield situation.
Yeah, another point about Dragonair as well is that it also can do a little bit better against Kingdra as well with that Dragon Breath fast move.
Yeah, it's a win no matter what. Worst case scenario, you tie with Kingdra, mm-hmm. which is not a bad situation to be in, compared to Lapras, who will lose in the one shield, even with Dragon Pulse, and needs a shield bait to win, or will tie in a non-shield bait situation.
And then I think Ice Shard Lapras is another one that we didn't mention. Sorry, Ice Shard Lapras is just another one that we didn't mention that Dragonair will lose to, whereas if you were running Water Gun Lapras, that would win.
Yeah, with Dragonair.
Yeah.
I don't see a whole lot of Dragonair or Kingdra anymore with Lapras being around. Even Surf Lapras generally has a better matchup spread than both Dragonair or Kingdra. Outside of the two of them beat Lapras most of the time.
Yeah, and one of the comments from our Twitch chat from Zionic, shout out to him. He's also content creator on our server. He blasts out a lot of videos and such. He was talking about Ice Shard might be a good pick, say if you don't have a Bastiodon as sort of a dragon counter, beef up your ability to counter Altaria, say. And that Bastiodon can beat Lapras because he's weak to rock. That's true. Shields down,
really
Bastiodon will beat Lapras, but shields up, Lapras very reliably has the upper hand because that Water Gun Surf combination will hit Bastiodon neutral damage too often versus Bastiodon's very slow charging Stone Edge. It normally will not be enough to counter Lapras. And that's actually one of the main reasons I did not include that relationship in the infographic, is because they don't really counter each other. There's situations where Lapras will win, and there's situations where Bastiodon will win. They sort of check each other. Versus...
If you have a shield, which isn't that uncommon in Kingdom Cup, you can switch into Bastiodon every time, I believe.
Yes, if you have a shield. So
yeah, that's the biggest.
That's the thing.
Mockery of Kingdom Cup is the shielding situation. Just because of how oddball shields are in this cup, where with things are fast attack battles or maybe Lucario double shielded to keep power up punches. Yeah, it's just.
Yeah, I mean, in Kingdom, it's not uncommon to like burn through your first two Pokemon without having used any shields. If you're saying using like Blaziken and Bronzong or something like that, you know, some hard hitting fast move.
Or if you just
users.
failed the shield bait,
right?
protection.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've had fights. I've had one fight where actually I had a Charizard take out their first two Pokemon, and I went down 0 shields. He still had 2 shields. He brought in Charizard and wiped my whole team. It was just a complete reversal.
Yeah. So that's something interesting about shields. I've also encountered that same situation. You do want to kind of sprinkle your heavy hitting charge move attackers a little bit with your heavy hitting fast move attackers, because if you have too much of either or, then you either rely too much on shields, or you're going to give your opponent the ability to have 2 shields at the end. So kind of pick your poison, right? Having a little bit of balance there helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I think Lucario is best countered by the fires over the grounds or anything like that, because they can win without needing a single charge move. And certain Pokemon that need charge moves, like Altaria, technically, there's some situations where Flygon, or not Flygon, Lucario can double shield versus Altaria and come out reasonably okay, but not always. But definitely versus like Frostlass, if somebody, or Alolan Marowak, you can double shield versus those and have 2 attack charges, and then go into the next Pokemon with an okay-ish Lucario and just really dent that one pretty heavily.
Yep. So that is the gist of it as far as the main meta goes. I see Bronzong getting a lot of play. I'm actually trying to include a team with Bronzong and Flygon. It's pretty tough. I'm doing kind of like a practice tournament right now remotely. We'll see how it goes without running Bastiodon. The things that I definitely don't see doing well is a team without a Lucario, and for the most part, a team without a Lapras or an Altaria. You could basically swap Bastiodon or Steelix, but Bastiodon gets more favorable matchups generally.
Without a Bastiodon or without a Steelix, you're really weak to Charizard and Altaria, because the two of them, if they see a no Bastion line, you're probably going to see one, if not both of them, every match, just because there's not a whole lot that hard counters the two of them.
Right. So we're on the infographic. We're just discussing the main meta before we go into any team reviews. So the other sort of honorable mentions here would be Empoleon. Not mentioned here would be also Frostless, which we talked about very, very briefly, and then Kingdra. So I'm not as familiar with Empoleon and Kingdra matchups as probably you two are, but I do know they've had a little bit of mention, and some people will definitely be bringing them.
Empoleon is a very, very interesting water type, because it's basically playing with Waterfall, and that's it. I don't know if Empoleon's ever going to charge attack. Maybe once before it dies. But it wins versus Steelix. It easily beats Charizard. It wins if it properly shields versus Flygon. It beats Blaziken. It beats Torkoal. It beats Bronzong. And it beats Alolan Marowak. But it loses to Lapras, Lucario, Kingdra, and Dragonair, and Altaria.
But it could also be Bastiodon. I don't know. I'm sure.
It could beat Bastiodon, is that what you said?
Yes. It's not a very pretty fight, but it does beat Bastiodon pretty easily.
Because a flamethrower would still hurt. And while SmackDown is resisted, you're going to be using a flamethrower from Bastiodon against Empoleon. Because nuke damage is better than stab. Because you barely take place.
Yeah, it takes 2 flamethrowers, so it needs a shield, or it doesn't need a shield, and it just hydro pumps. But it takes 1 flamethrower pretty reliably, and Smackdown's doing about 5 damage a hit, whereas Waterfall's doing 9 damage. So it really hurts Bastion back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kingdra, on the other hand, first of all, you don't necessarily need water gun, but that can set its water dragon and actually spam some of the other dragon types. Dragon breath is always good, but if you have legacy waterfall unfortunately traps out of Kingdra, but it actually does decently well in fire types. Waterfall, the water gun will pass you down dragon breath that are Lapras, and Dragon Breath is better against Mario, but you're also kind of in a stalemate against that Dragon for real bad. And with Mario, I think Water Gun is better, but at that point, Kingdra doesn't have the last 2 power up, especially with all the
Could you guys get any of that?
I got some of it, but mostly it's just
he was mostly talking about
water.
Yeah, Kingdra and Dragon Breath versus Water Gun, I think.
Yeah, I'm still on school Wi-Fi. Sorry about that, guys.
Okay.
Waterfall's an interesting pick on Kingdra, and I think you would go Waterfall over Water Gun just because of the damage at that point. Dragon Breath and Water Gun do about the same damage, even when Dragon Breath is resisted. So you just want to stay Dragon Breath for the better matchups there. But Waterfall can pick up some interesting matchups, but you still lose to Bastiodon. You're still gonna lose. You're gonna lose to Lapras a lot harder than Dragon Breath. So I don't see water on Kingdra being a thing you want to run.
I mean, it's more that if you have Water Gun, don't TM it away. You don't.
Yeah, no, save it for another day. Save it for the water cup or something like that. But
actually, even still, the water cup you probably still want Dragon Breath. But that's another story. We'll get to that one when it comes.
yeah, I don't see Kingdra with a water move, fast move being very prevalent because you basically trade the unique matchups that Kingdra gets, which is Lapras and the other dragons and stuff like that, and you lose those matchups, and you don't really gain any of the ground, rock, steel types. You're still beating the fire types pretty easily. So it's just
slightly better matchup.
Better matchups with Bastiodon. Is that what you said?
Yeah, Bastiodon.
You're breaking up quite a bit.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's still a loss though to Bastiodon. I mean, you got to have a lot of energy advantage to beat Basti with Water Gun or Waterfall, because Bastiodon's just going to hit you with neutral Smackdowns and then neutral Stone Edges, and that's not a fight you want.
And so we did talk a little bit about Frostless. What matchups does Frostless gain that nobody else can do, and why is it a threat to really keep in mind if you're running a full-on meta team?
I don't think it gains any specific matchups that nobody else does. It's just a matter of the fact that outside of the steals and like Bastiodon, Steelix, Lapras, Charizard, it beats almost everything else. Even in one shield situations, it can beat Altaria, beats Flygon, beats Blaziken, beats Kingdra, beats Bronzong pretty easily, beats Alolan Marowak. Like there's a lot of targets it beats, but where it really wants to be is in that zero shield because there's a lot of really strong matchups it has there.
Yeah, I think Bronzong and Lucario are really the two that Frostlass doesn't really want to face with a shield, like with shields up. Those are kind of the two. Like you mentioned, Altaria and Flygon, are obviously just going to drop to Frostlass's, ice attacks. But it definitely has some really good matchups. I think the fact that it can also beat Hexalil and Marowak is really strong.
It pretty resoundingly beats Hex Marowak.
Yep.
Like, I don't think there's any room for wiggle. It's still bloodied coming out of that. I think it comes out of that with like 10-15% HP.
Yeah.
But that's actually most of its one shield fights. It comes out in that low 10 to 15% HP range. It's in the zero shield fights that it comes out at near full health. Like, if you catch a Blaziken at no shields, you're just going to destroy it with the Shadow Ball.
Nothing really comes out well out of a Shadow Ball Frostless.
Yeah, and it's not super effective damage, but it's neutral and it's stab, and it's a really good move in general. And Powder Snow charges it very quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just,
and
it's
Frostless
amazing.
Happens to have really high attack too for what it is. Nothing in this meta resists Ghost. Certainly in the meta, but generally, I think the only thing that resists Ghost is like Sneasel. He's an ice type, but I wouldn't be caught dead with a Sneasel team.
No, Weavile or Sneasel, just they're too frail to even bother showing up. Frostlass is the only other ice type other than Lapras that could even consider being played. And it'll all depend on how well your team can break shields in order for it to actually see effective use.
Well, I think we basically covered the meta. In the trash bin, if you're wondering what those two are, we put Camerupt, which has become somewhat of a meme for our server, and then Abomasnow. Abomasnow, the only thing it has going for it, I guess, is that it beats Lapras. So there you go.
Lapras
but
yeah.
Yeah. Other than that, good luck beating anything else. Good luck beating Lucario. Good luck beating Charizard. Certainly. Good luck beating Altaria. Good luck beating Bastiodon. Basically anything will beat Abomasnow handily. So that's where it belongs, right in the trash.
Melmetal's another interesting maybe choice because it does counter Altaria, and it gets Charizard most of the time. Even if Charizard, like, it just Rock Slide comes out too quick. But and it goes neutral with Bronzong. But that's about it on its really meta matchups. But it's certainly not a pick that you should be like, oh, it's never going to show up. But somebody will bring a Melmetal. You just got to be aware of what you need to take it down with.
Yeah, and that also opens the door for Probopass. If Probopass gets released in the middle of the month, which it very well could be, it also has that similar role. It beats Bastiodon with double electric, and it does pretty well against stuff like Altaria, and probably doesn't do well at all against Steelix, but it does okay against Lapras too, right? Probopass has some interesting matchups, probably similar to Melmetal.
Yeah, I think it actually does better than Melmetal against Lapras. It's actually able to win.
Rock Throw from Probopass will beat Lapras easily, whereas Melmetal will pretty much lose every Lapras fight. And Probopass is actually a really nice with Rock Throw. You beat quite a few targets. You're going to lose to Steelix, Lucario, Alolan Dugtrio, Flygon, and Bastiodon. But that Bastiodon fight is really close.
Right.
Just, I guess, one more small one. Kind of trash bin.
And then if you run Spark, you'll beat Bastiodon. And the only thing you gain in a losing matchup would be Blaziken.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
but you still lose.
yeah, it's you lose to Blaziken no matter what, but Rock Throw ties, whereas Spark will just completely lose to Blaziken.
Yeah. So Rock Throw charges faster, is that what it is?
I think Rock Throw just has a better neutral damage.
Huh.
I don't know. It might charge faster versus, and that might be what it is. I haven't looked too much into Probopass because it hasn't come out yet.
Yeah.
But it's a pretty solid. It's a better replacement for Bastiodon if you can't afford a Bastiodon than Steelix is, if it gets released this month.
Yeah. Interesting. Because he's got a rock high, or a very, very high defense stat, just like Bastiodon does. And back when pretty much Magneton was the only game in town for before Melmetal, Probopass was looked at as kind of what was going to shake the meta up pretty nicely. But then Bastiodon got a move change, and then Melmetal was released, so things changed in the other direction. And we still have yet to see Probopass. Magnezone shouldn't shake up anything, I don't think.
No,
Magneton but better. Like, it does worse.
Magnezone has worse charge moves than Magneton, though. That's the only problem with that one.
I mean, it has access to wild charge, so advantage if you can get that off. But the good thing about Magneton is that the shock discharge combo is just so spammable that you either burn shields or you do it really quick. In most cases, you can get off 2 discharges or nearly 2 of them before they get off one of their own charges.
Could you guys get the gist of what he said?
Yeah, basically, Magneton's discharge just comes out so much faster.
Yeah.
And it's not as shield blocked as Magnezone's wild charge will be.
Yeah.
Plus, Magneton gets Thundershock, which is a much better move than Spark. So really, unfortunately, as much as I love Magnezone, it's going to need a move change to make any real headway in PvP.
Yeah. Yeah, Magneton just has a really good set of moves and poor stats. Well, he's still, he's glassy and such, but if anything changed, it's almost, it's just very situational how it's been really good. But a move change to Magnezone, or say I guess release of different moves to even Melmetal would change things up for Magneton.
Yeah, if Melmetal could get a faster electric move, because it already really likes Rock Slide, it's never going to change out of that one. But it needs something other than Thunderbolt to threaten this cup in particular. In Great League, Melmetal's fine. Thunderbolt's hard enough and slow enough that it's okay. But versus this cup where you want it versus the Lapras fight, you just need a better, faster hitting or much harder hitting electric move.
So basic structure of these teams, I guess, is what I'm gathering from what I've seen so far. The ball core, so Bastiodon, Altaria, Lapras, and Lucario. Fire, definitely you want at least one. Which one you choose will kind of depend on what your flex is. So your fire and your flex spot. You could use Bronzong, and then you'd have reasons to choose one of the other fire types based on that. But that core of 4 is pretty important. You could probably substitute Bastiodon for Steelix, but then the acronym wouldn't be as nice. So I think we can move on to team reviews if you guys are up for it. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams if you guys want to review those. So the first one is it's Smogon Devo. He's got a Lapras with Dragon Pulse, Bastiodon, Altaria, Bronzong, Lucario, and Blaziken. So he is pretty much exactly what we said. He's running the Ball Core, a fire type, which is Blaziken, and Bronzong. So, what would be his weaknesses? What would really take advantage of this team?
So I think one issue with this team, a minor hole, is that it's a little weak to Bronzong itself, despite having the mirror option, because Bronzong will counter Lapras, Altaria, as well as Blaziken. It has the mirror, which generally, at least when I'm counting matchups, I don't really count that as a reason to not bring something. And then Lucario is one of those situations to where, and we kind of mentioned this before, but the Bronzong Lucario matchup is really not one that Lucario wants to face if Bronzong has a shield. It's a little IV dependent, the outcomes, at one shield at least. But Bronzong would be a pretty good team, a pretty good option and safe lead or safe pivot against this team with shields up.
Alolan Marowak is also one that can do some work versus that team as well, because it'll beat Blaziken, it'll beat Bronzong, it can favorably match up versus Lucario, depending, and it's not a complete wash versus Lapras. It's still going to lose, but it can dent Lapras pretty heavily with the Shadow Ball.
Yeah, and Charizard, I think too, because again, as we've sort of found a pattern here, he beats Blaziken. He has that sort of Hail Mary against Lapras. I suppose if he were able to get a Blast Burn off, he definitely beats Lucario, and has somewhat favorable matches to Bronzong as well. Of course, Bastiodon and Altaria hard counter it, but Charizard could do quite well too.
Charizard is a lot of the same thing as Lucario versus Bronzong.
Yeah,
they're both kind of ties, but not really. It depends on when the charge moves come out. If they reset the fast attack and give Bronzong more energy, if IDs are a factor there too. Both of them just want a fast attack the whole way through until you can fire off a Dragon Claw to finish off the Bronzong, basically. You don't want to really waste time on a Blast Burn, because if it gets shielded, that's a lot of energy gone.
Yeah. Just
I
spam Dragon Claw.
I don't like Blaziken and Bronzong on the same team. Mostly because I don't think their coverage is that unique.
So I was about to say, if placed with a little Marowak, would that help composition?
As opposed to Blaziken?
Blaziken?
Yeah. That would be my suggestion.
Well, Alolan Marowak gains, he'd be able to beat Charizard as opposed to losing to Charizard. So that would be something favorable to him.
He also beats the Bronzong matchup that I mentioned. That might be a safe lead against that team.
Yeah. Although, without Blaziken in there, you do kind of open yourself a little bit more to Bastiodon. You have Lucario there. You have your own Bastiodon. And then you have Lapras, who tends to have the winning match, as we said with Shields earlier. But I guess Bastiodon users might be a little bit braver to use use them against this team if Blaziken was swapped out in favor of Marowak. Although Marowak, you have that sort of curveball that it could be running Rock Smash, and at that point you're like, well, damn. I thought my Bastiodon counters it, and it turns out we're pretty much going even.
Yeah, Rock Smash though, somebody will run it, and you gotta respect it, but the Hex matchup is just that much better for Marowak to run.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It trades a lot of. Yeah, it's just a lot better versus the field, even though you'll beat Lucario every time with Rock Smash. That's really the big key. Is if you're weak to Lucario, you pack a Rock Smash Marowak.
Hmm.
Or you back a Blaziken or a Charizard. I think that's just a better choice.
Yeah, I agree.
Although that's what we said about Lantern. We were kind of, we ended up, I don't know, criticizing is the right word, but giving feedback of like maybe you want to switch over to Water Gun instead of Charge Beam on Lantern, and because Charge Beam was so kind of anti-meta against Lantern itself, it ended up getting a lot of favorable matches in some places. So, as you say, it's definitely something to consider in your opponent, but probably not the best to consider for yourself. So that's how I
you really
see
like Marowak beating up Lucario with Rock Smash, and you can catch the Bastiodon where they think it is a safe switch.
Yeah,
but that'll be game 1. Maybe you do it game 2 to win that one.
Yeah. So Smargan, we're just wrapping up on your team. I know you just got here. We're saying your team is basically the standard format that we were looking at. You are a little bit open to a lot of the fire types, since most of the fire types like Charizard, AWAC, and I forget what else we mentioned.
Bronzong.
Yeah, Bronzong. Thank you. So those three have quite a few more openings than they would if you had, say, Charizard or Alolan Marowak instead of Blaziken on that team. It's not to say that you have to drop those, because then you sort of favor Bastiodon a little bit more against this team. But that is something to consider, is that you're baiting, perhaps you're baiting Charizard or Alolan Marowak a little bit more, or Bronzong itself with this particular team. So if you see one of those, maybe you want to lead with Bastiodon or something that counters them.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Would you guys agree to that?
Bronzong in your team with that, because Blaziken already handles the Lapras fight moderately well. The only thing Bronzong's going to pick up is the Altaria fight for the most part. So maybe you bring a Steelix, because Blaziken can keep Lucarios at bay, or you bring a Flygon instead of Bronzong, just to help cover the Bastiodon Steelix weaknesses that are also prevalent in your team.
So if he's running Dragon Pulse and he doesn't have Bronzong, he would basically rely on Bastiodon against Altaria.
Right, but if he switches in like a Steelix instead of Bronzong, he has that as a secondary coverage.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Plus, Dragon Pulse will beat Altaria every time. It's just you're tying at a worst case scenario, except in the Zero Shield, where that's the one-time Ice Beam is better.
Yeah. So we'll move on, unless you had any questions. So he says drop Blaziken for Alolan Marowak. I like Zard or Whack, but not too worried about Bastiodon if I drop Blaziken. Bronzong is really good versus me right now, so Zard or Whack. So that's what he's debating. Dropping Blaziken for
probably
Charizard
drop Blaziken
or
for Charizard, just because it's a better straight up counter to Lucario. You are weaker to Bastiodon at that point, but you do have Lapras and Lucario. They'll cover Bastiodon pretty easily.
Yeah, and Bronzong doesn't do badly against Bastiodon, say in like the no shield scenario too. I mean, Bastiodon has, I don't know, maybe like around 10% or something like that HP left.
Yeah, it's not a fight Bronzong wants to take, but it'll
right.
go out kicking.
Okay. So I think we're good to move on to the next one. We have Scar Lord. He posted his team of 6 is Lucario, Altaria, Bastiodon, and then he kind of strays away from sort of the format, at least that we determined was best, with Frostless, Blaziken, and Fortress. Personally, I'm not as familiar with Fortress matchups. I know one person in particular I'm thinking about that's a huge Fortress fan. Notable things that Fortress is weak to, of course, is Fire, which Frostless is also pretty weak to. But he does sort of help out with a lot of the. I think a lot of the Dragon matchups he goes pretty well, and he walls the. Well, I guess he does pretty well against Lapras too, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember.
Yeah, Fortress is kind of like an inverse relation to Bronzong. You'll pick up some of the same fights, but you're going to lose to Altaria. You're going to lose to all the fires. You're still going to lose to Lucario, and you're kind of going to go even with Lapras for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah, my biggest issue when simming Fortress was that it really relies on that shield bait. Like the matchups, the positive matchups that you get from just like double charge move simming, like Bastion, for example, where it's landing that Earthquake after baiting the shield with Heavy Slam. It really has to bait several matchups where it's landing that Earthquake consistently. And so,
just to point out what Polymers is saying, with a shield bait, it gets 10 of the concentrated meta as a win. Without the shield bait, it only gets 5. And of those 5, it's Frostlass, Metagross, Adug, Kingdra, and Steelix. So those really aren't potent meta threats outside of Steelix.
Yeah.
Yeah, that perfectly highlighted what I was trying. What the point I was trying to make was that it really relies on that shield bait. Like maybe at first glance, you see a lot of those positive matchups, and then when you dig a little deeper and see that you kind of have to get that shield bait consistently to consistently win those, and that's not something at least I'd want to bet on.
Yeah, looking into even with the shield bait, you really only win versus Bastiodon, Bronzong, and then Lapras and Flygon is very close. Like it's really hard to call those. You win with a shield bait from 0-0, but I haven't looked deeper into seeing if that maybe is flipped by IVs or energy gain, so you can't switch in. So there's not a whole lot that Fortress is beating that's really meta relevant, especially in the ball core and the fire core and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, Beagle just wanted to point out that, with successful shield baits, the thing it has going for them is a steel type that counters all of the steals. So it does well against. How does it do against Bastiodon? It does beat Bastiodon, right? Pretty reliably.
With the shield bait, it'll beat Bastiodon every time.
Yeah. So.
But Metagross is a steel type that you might see in a local, but you're not going to see in like our remote tournaments here. Steelix is, again, you might see a Steelix 1 out of every 6 matchups. Somebody brings it as instead of Bastiodon. And Bronzong is, again, you might see Bronzong occasionally. So really, you're hinging on that Bastiodon fight for Fortress, and that's not a sure thing for you.
Okay. Yeah, so Scarlard's also saying he's updated his team since, pretty much completely changed it, which is unfortunate because it was it was a pretty interesting team. But he's got Lucario, Altaria, Bastiodon, Lapras, so he's got that ball core. And then his flex spot is Steelix, and his fire spot is Blaziken. So
it's basically like what we were talking with Smogon Dev, where we said drop Bronzor for Steelix, and that's it's not a bad core. I think you'll do fine with that. So.
Ice Beam also instead of Dragon Pulse.
Right, which depending on how prevalent Kingdra and stuff like that is, Ice Beam really isn't that big a deal.
Yeah.
It's just that you do
win
more
Ice Beam
matchups
is good.
with right. But the fact that Dragon Pulse gets more matches on paper, it's a lot of those off meta targets that may or may not show.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So Scarlord, I think you're listening. That's pretty much one of the teams that we recommended some modifications from. So I'm glad you've dropped the Frostless propaganda. Suits you well. Beagle, maybe you could take a note from him.
I want to see somebody do well with Frostless because on paper it's got such nice matchups and like a great win percentage. It's just in the actual play, it's going to be hard to get it in and keep it alive.
So yeah, and Sebastian Ali, he had a question from the live stream chat. He said, "Does Bastiodon and Bronzong share roles? Would it be possible to run both?" Well, yes, it's definitely possible to run both. Bronzong, as we sort of mentioned, Bronzong is less reliable in countering stuff like Charizard #1. It's a very very even match, or it certainly loses to Marowak. So they're pretty very very much different in what they counter. Bronzong is not as clear cut in its matchups against stuff like Bastiodon is, for example. I think we can move on to the next team, which happens to be my team. I sort of put this together thinking we'll just see how it goes. I wanted to see what would happen if I ran a team without Bastiodon. So far, it's been okay. I'm in a little bit of a remote practice tournament right now. And it's Marowak with Hex, Lapras with Dragon Pulse, Steelix, Altaria, Bronzong, and Lucario. So, roast me.
I think you are really weak to Charizard.
Yeah.
Just right out the gate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Altaria is your only surefire matchup versus Charizard. I think that's all you've got there to just switch in and take Zard down. Bronzong's going to be iffy, and yeah.
Yeah, Lapras is sort of a good, I guess, soft counter, generally speaking, and then Marowak does okay, but it's not pretty after Charizard matchup.
Yeah,
and if I'm relying on Marowak to beat Lucario after, well, good luck on that, I guess. So I got pummeled with a Charizard team.
You have a lot of
with Valarash
to the main core, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But if somebody double brings something, you're just going to be kind of SOL.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so one thing that I do like that you do is bringing Steelix over Bastiodon. The two matchups that it loses that Bastiodon would typically win or fare better in are Lapras and Charizard. And so, I mean, you do a good job of covering the Lapras side of that by running Dragon Pulse on your Lapras, as well as bringing Bronzong and Lucario. So yeah, I think really it's just Charizard from the Steelix over Basti standpoint that you're a little more vulnerable to.
Yeah, you do open up a bit. I mean, you have the hard counter to Blaziken, but Lapras, Steelix, and Lucario are all taken out by Blaziken. But I mean, that would be the same thing with Bastiodon, but Bastiodon hurts Blaziken back, where Steelix just can't.
Right. Yeah. So well, I guess we'll see. I just really wanted to just give it a crash test, not necessarily what I'm going to use in more competitive tournaments. This is more of a practice round. What changes would you guys recommend if you had to make a change?
I'd probably drop either Bronzong or Steelix. The double steal there, or the triple steal there with Lucario, technically, because they kind of have a similar matchup spread between the two of them. And it's not like identical, but they do about the same job. That I don't see teams of 6 having both Bronzong and Steelix.
I do like that they both counter, that Bronzong counters Lapras, which sort of protects Steelix as well, though. I think as in terms of like a team that's trying or if you're trying to build a team without Basti, I think this is honestly like a pretty good model. I mean, even the ones that we've mentioned, like Charizard that Gott's brought up, you do have a couple of soft counters, and then Altaria is the hard counter.
Right. I think that's generally just my problem with that team altogether. Is there's a bunch of soft counters to everything, rather than a few hard counters, which can go either way. I mean, one way you're not going to get blown out by switching a Blaziken into a Bronzong, but if you're trying to rely on a Lucario or Lapras to take a Bronzong down, it's just going to be a neutral fight, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say maybe Frostlass too, potentially, as it does beat a Marowak and Altaria pretty hard, and it could close well at least against Lucario and Bronzong.
Right. The only thing on his team that Frostlass really fears is Lapras and Steelix.
Yeah.
Outside of that, it can take everything else moderately comfortably. Lucario is a iffy fight, but it still appreciates nuking Lucario down pretty hard. And it might be a weird thing, but I could see dropping Empoleon or putting in Empoleon over Bronzor, just because it does pick up that Charizard matchup. It softens up your fire weakness because you are moderately weak to the fires, and it does an extra coverage against Basti, but I don't think you need the extra because you've got 3 targets for Bastiodon.
That might make him a little too vulnerable to Altaria, though, because then his only real Altaria count would be Steelix.
Steelix and Lapras will do the job. Lapras is a tie at worst with Dragon Pulse.
I guess if he was running Ice Beam, I would feel a little more comfortable with that.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Flygon does some pretty decent work versus your team as well.
Yep. I've felt
the
wrath of Flygon. Actually, Valor Ash and I did some scrimmages, and I was a little distracted, so I'll take this with a grain of salt. But I just got pummeled by his. He ran a lot of Flygon and a lot of Charizard, and I'll do some more matches and just see how it goes. But yeah, absolutely, Flygon. I really needed Altaria, so if he takes out my Altaria, that really forfeits the match for me if he's bringing Flygon for the most part.
I think in general your team is held together by Altaria too much.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I've run Altaria a lot in the cores of 3, and that could end up being pretty predictable. But Altaria is a solid pick anyway, so. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not totally sold on this, but we'll see how it goes. I do have an Ice Beam Lapras as well. I just don't necessarily want to invest in it right now. So, do you guys have any more comments on this, or can we move on to Juice to Master?
Yeah, we can move on.
Okay. I think he's here. Are you here? No?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I'm here. I'm actually outside doing a pillow sign raid right now.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll talk about it.
Do you want to just do the next team and then I'll come back, or like, do you want to just do the next one before me? There's another one.
Sure, Trainer Ramamco. If you're here, I'm gonna make sure I give you a little shout out in the chat. So your team is up next, and so you posted Blaziken, adequately named Jorah, Melmetal. Then he's got Lapras with Water Gun, Ice Beam, hopefully Surf, and then Alolan Marowak, Flygon, and Altaria, all Game of Thrones themed names. So, Melmetal is the interesting choice here. I guess is sort of substituting your Bastiodon pick here, And for the most part, you have Ball, but you're missing an L with Lucario. Except that you're trying to substitute Lucario with Blaziken. So, what would this team be weak to?
Empoleon, just actually looking at it, Melmetal beats Empoleon, I believe. But Empoleon would beat the two Fires and Flygon reliably. I think he's actually moderately weak to Kingdra as well. Just off the top of my head.
Lapras.
Yeah, he's really weak to a Lapras.
Lapras will beat Melmetal. If he's got Dragon Pulse, he beats his Lapras. He beats Alolan Marowak. He beats Flygon. Goes pretty even with Altaria. And he goes even with Blaziken. So an enemy Lapras with Dragon Pulse has a pretty good opening on this team.
Yeah, I don't think the only thing that you have in your team to counter Lapras is Blaziken, but that's a tie matchup that you don't really. I mean, you'll take it, but yeah, if Melmetal had a better matchup versus Lapras, it would see more competitive play easily.
Yeah, agreed. Frostlass does pretty good against this team too. Aside from Lapras and Melmetal, it could really do some damage.
Yeah,
and unlike some of the teams that we've mentioned before, where it's sort of the caveat of beating, say, Bronze or Luke or both, in sort of a closing situation when shields are down, this team Frostlass can be 4 out of 6 regardless of shield situations.
Yeah, Melmetal's a pretty decent counter to Frostlass.
Yeah, it does.
Even with a bit of energy gain, Frostlass will usually lose.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think Frostlass beats, like you said, the 4 of them, and then it can heavily dent even Melmetal and Lapras with Shadow Ball if it gets in as a parting shot, basically.
And then another comment was that he's weak to Steelix. My call dropped there for a minute, but did you guys mention Steelix at all?
Yeah, I think I threw Steelix out at the beginning, even though Lapras covers that and Flygon covers it a bit. But Blaziken and Altaria and Melmetal and AWAC would just get shredded by Steelix. I think
Melmetal gets walled pretty hard by Steelix.
Yeah. Oh no, Blaziken can beat Steelix if it has a shield. Otherwise, it's a tie.
So I'm curious whether he's running this team as sort of an effort to not run Bastiodon or Lucario, or out of necessity he's not running those. In which case, you'd probably be a lot better off if you did substitute Lucario for Blaziken and then Bastiodon for Melmetal. Generally speaking, that would probably help you out.
I think he'd be fine if he just dropped Melmetal for Steelix. I think that lineup could do well.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Generally, I find myself leaning towards Steelix as for anyone that's looking for a Bastiodon alternative. I think it has a few more matchups that Melmetal doesn't quite get, and then it also wins the head-to-head, which is big.
At least until Probopass. Like once Probopass comes out, that is the clear secondary, and possibly even the primary, just in what it can do.
Yeah. So he does not have Bastiodon or Lucario. So sound advice on those other alternatives. If you can get your hands on a Steelix, I wasn't a big Steelix fan in Tempest Cup, But as you can see, I'm running it on my first team, so I'm pretty happy with it, and it's very satisfying to watch a Bastiodon try to beat a Steelix. Very, very satisfying if you're the Steelix user. So, in any case, I guess we can move on. Hopefully, Choose Master finishes his raid soon. If not, we can move on
I'm out
to
already.
Joe Pal. Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, sorry, I was just in the middle of it. I'm just right by some construction, so I'm going to turn my mic off again.
Sure. So you're running a ball, so just a standard Bastiodon, Altaria, Lucario, Lapras, Blaziken, and Charizard, so he's doubled up on fire. His basic strategy is when they don't have Bastiodon or Lapras, he runs Blaziken, and if they have one or none, and or have Blaziken themselves, he runs Charizard instead. While we sort of dissect this, if you have a second, I'd like to know what charge move on Lapras, just to get a better general idea.
Ice Beam on Lapras.
Ice Beam. Okay,
yeah.
Great. So what do you guys think?
Double Fire is definitely an interesting choice. But if he's running Basti to counter Lapras, that's a soft counter there. And Lucario already does pretty well versus Lapras, and Bastiodon is or Blaziken, sorry, I was originally talking about. But I don't know if you need both Blaziken and Charizard on the same team.
So basically, my thinking, like I've always loved like double flyers or double electric and Tempest. I ran all 4 of them, just so that I always had flexibility, and also so that if I played one, like I doubled up, and they would think a swap in was safe because they'd already beaten the counter, and then bring in the other one. So that's. Sorry, go ahead.
I think it's definitely a viable option to run a double of something because of they only usually bring 1 counter. I don't know if Charizard and Blaziken together have enough coverage on like the entire team. You would then be weak to a double counter back. I mean, it sounds redundant, but the problem is Blaziken and Charizard are they're not going to fare well versus Bastiodon and Lapras. And I mean, you don't want to bring either of those to a fight in that one, and then you're just kind of running just the ball core, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you've lost your flexibility in just against the ball core, so to speak.
Yeah,
I guess.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, like, in my theory crafting, I haven't done a lot of scrimmaging yet, but I basically almost always saw myself bringing 2 of the ball core plus a fire counter. So it didn't feel like I was losing that much by using a second fire counter in my flex spot.
Yeah, I don't know what both the fire counters get you, because I think you're generally always Blaziken seems to be the best of the fires, but Charizard, I mean, they have different matchups, and the 2 of them together, I don't think they pair well in what they cover compared to picking up like an Empoleon or a Steelix or a Bronzor or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I've seen, at least early on, I feel like, is people sometimes tend to overload on like the Luke Basti counters, and that really opens them up to like a Lap Altaria lineup. For example, like I didn't catch what he was running on Lapras, but Ice Beam. So I mean, an Altaria would still do really well, though, being able to beat both of those fire options, as well as Lucario, and then, the mirror is sort of a draw. And then a Lapras would also be able to do well, especially if it was Dragon Pulse, being able to win the mirror. But I think that's just one thing that I would keep in mind is, maybe adding, say, like having a Bronzong in there or something like that, to sort of leverage those 2 flex spots, to where you have a similar amount of versatility, but maybe you can sort of pivot one way or the other to sort of hard counter a lap alt lineup or a hard counter a Luke Basti lineup, for example, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at with, like, I like Steelix or I like Bronzong because they don't have great matchups, but they've got a lot of positive matchups that they're safe switches, so to speak.
Yeah, that's going to be huge. I mean, unless you're relying fully on the luck of what your lead is, or maybe you're just an excellent reader in that you can kind of determine what the other guy's going to be running based on whatever reverse psychology game you're playing. Sometimes it just doesn't work.
I'm gonna go average is best there.
Yeah, so sometimes that doesn't work, and so you have to have a plan B to fall back on. And so, as Gotts was saying, being able to, quick switch to something else that'll still counter your opponent, but it's not like a slam dunk counter to anything else on their team, or anything that they're reliably going to bring anyway. Bronzong is a pretty good pick. Sometimes Steelix is a good pick. It just kind of depends on what their other team composition is.
Yeah, that's where, like, even Dragonair could fill that role of that flex pick because it's got such an odd matchup spread that you switch to Dragonair and your opponent might not even switch to the right counter.
Yeah. They might switch to Bastiodon, for example, at that point.
Right. Or they see the switch and they immediately switch, doing a quick switch, and you're like, oh, here's Dragonair. And they're like, oh, crap, I just threw my Steelix. Well, it's going to win, but man, that's not a pretty fight, and I didn't want to use Steelix versus Dragonair.
Yeah. So, I guess you just, doubling up on a category is not necessarily a bad thing, but as they said, with the specifically these two fire types, it might not work so well.
So. Yeah, in Kingdom Cup, I'm not as big a fan of the double up strategy as I was in Tempest. It's like double electric, double flying, double water. They tended to cover each other much better than the double fire do in this cup, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, you could probably run a double fire with Alolan Marowak and Blaziken or Charizard, since Marowak can get some of those extra things that the regular fires lose to. But even then, I think you'd be better off with another water or another ground or something like that.
Yeah, I went with those two mainly just because I expect Blaziken to be the one that most people lean towards, since it does have the Basti coverage to some extent. And then I like that Charizard could beat their Luke and maybe beat their Blaziken. Like, I like having one rock, paper, scissors piece that beats both rock and paper or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. And I think you pick one of those, and depending on what you think your cup is going to be running, if you're running a local or if you're running our tournament 4, please let me know so I pick the other one. Thanks. But I think you just pick one and then you pick a flex spot in that 6 spot that just covers your weaknesses a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think too. Go ahead.
Just a real quick one comment on our Twitch feed was that we feel Blaziken should be considered a fighting type and not a fire type. As far as his damage output is concerned, yeah, we agree. But the reason we qualify him as a fire type, especially in our infograph, is because of the counters and matchups are very similar. The biggest difference with Blaziken is that he gets to counter Bastiodon. So anyway, that was just a quick note from the chat. So what were you guys saying?
So I just real quick about the point you just made. I will say Blaziken is sort of a fighting type offensively, but defensively he does fall more into the fire grouping rather than where Lucario sort of sits in the meta. I think that's sort of an important distinction. But what I was going to say about what Choose Master was saying was that, and Gotts, was that I don't think doubling up on the hard counters, that sort of concept is not, I think it's still viable in Kingdom. I think it's maybe just not as obvious or immediately obvious. For example, running 2 flyers, those are so that you could lead, right, and then have a back counter option against a trope or some late trope or something like that. Whereas here, maybe bringing something like a bronze Lapras, where you have that flexibility against, say like Altaria or something like that. I think it's more. Those matchups aren't quite as obvious because they don't fall into necessarily like identifiable category. But I think the doubling up on hard counters to say like a lap alt core by bringing like Bastion Bronze like in the same lineup, I think that's definitely a viable strategy, and sort of mixing up those double counter, hard counter lineups.
Yeah. You guys good with moving on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Any more comments about this one? It's an interesting strategy, the double flyer, and I wouldn't disqualify it as far as tournaments goes. I do expect to see a little bit of it. Joe Powell 30, he posted his team: Water Gun, Ice Beam, Surf, Lapras. Then he's got Lucario, Bronzong, Charizard, Altaria, and Flygon. So he's got 2 Flex, a Fire, and just all, no B. So he doesn't have a Bastiodon, and he doesn't have a Bastiodon, really a Bastiodon equivalent, and his only check to Altaria is well, he's got Bronzong and Lapras counters it too. So, what do you guys think?
Yeah, other than the obvious, he only has one real hard counter to Altaria in Lapras. It's not a bad lineup per se. I don't think. I'm trying to think of other ways that he's really weak to certain targets.
Yeah. What about a Bastiodon against this team? I guess Flygon and Lapras do pretty well.
Flygon and Lapras and Lucario all would check Bastiodon pretty well.
Yeah, that's true. I guess I'm not used to seeing a team without the very hard-hitting dragon counter at all. I guess you wouldn't be using Lucario as much against this team either. So that might be something to consider. Maybe Lapras runs a little bit more freely.
Yeah, there's a lot of Lucario
in this
checks.
One. Yeah. So what I'm saying is like you don't have as much motivation to be running Lucario against this team as maybe you would if you had Bastiodon, for example, or Steelix.
It's going to get brought up again, but Frostlass does really well versus this team.
Yeah.
It's really only threatened by Lucario and Lapras. Everything else it'll beat. Charizard with shields is not a pretty fight for Frostlass, so you'll need another counter for Charizard, but 4 out of 6 is a really nice winning matchup for you.
Well, I think we covered that one pretty much in depth. I think we can go on a B Gold. He posted his team. He's got an Ice Beam Lapras, and then he has Charizard, Fortress, Lucario, Flygon, and Bastiodon.
Yeah, I'm here, guys, just walking, so if you hear any background noise, that's my mic's not.
Much better. Doesn't sound like you're in a bathroom inside a cubicle, inside a bathroom.
No, that's just my school.
Oh, okay.
So the thing that stands out immediately is the lack of Altaria in this lineup.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I also have, if you see what I posted under it, I have Altaria, Frostlass, and Polio, and Typhlosion.
Yeah, I can see that. It's just in your team of 6,
right?
Altaria would do a decent job, except against Bastiodon. But
I mean, I have the Lapras there. Flygon can still check it pretty well with Dragon Claw. So Fortress does pretty well against it too. It's more of a last-ditch thing, but like thought process for that was counter, well, building the team at least, counter Bastiodon and Lucario first, and then slot 4 others or 3 others that fit in to counter the remaining things, or soft checks so that I can have an energy advantage on the second fight or third fight. That's my thought process. So more specifically, like against the Altaria fight, I can lead either Flygon, Fortress, Lapras, or even Charizard and do a bunch of damage there, and then whatever of those 4, or even Bastiodon that comes in against the bloody Altaria, I'd have the energy advantage and the kill on it.
Right, but you're sacrificing switch advantage at that point because none of them can really win versus Altaria. So you bring in a Bastiodon, sure, it gets energy advantage, but now you're dead meat to a Lucario or a Blaziken, and they're just going to farm you. Well, not Blaziken so much, but Lucario can just farm your Bastiodon. And if you switch out, then they switch to another counter, and then you're switch locked at that point.
Right. Well, that was also a team I put together a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. I've done a bunch more testing, so that's why I'm not sure about it. I mean, I have Fortress in there. It's more of a flex spot for any of the steel types. Charizard, when I do get a better Torchic, will probably be replaced by Blaziken anyways. So that's why. But then again, that also kind of looks like the general team that everyone else did. Matt?
Yeah, I think Lucario does pretty well against this team. It's really just Charizard that it has to worry about. A Flygon can make it a close match and even draw in a couple of different scenarios. But
I think even Blaziken does well. I'm not sure on the Fortress fight versus Blaziken, and obviously Charizard would win.
Yeah, it takes 6 Fire Spins to take down a Fortress from Charizard, and I think it's 11 or 12 counters. But in that time, Bug Bite still does about like 45% of Blaziken.
Right, but Blaziken doesn't actually care about its HP total. It can win a fight at 2 HP, fire off a charge move, and it's done its job. That's all Blaziken actually cares about. I know.
Yeah, I just send that really Blaziken beats Fortress pretty handily.
Yeah.
About like 40% HP left.
Did you guys mention the Focus Blast on Blaziken, what that does to everything?
Oh, it basically one-shots the entire league.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Kakuna Matata simmed that against everything in the league. It essentially one-shots anything, no matter what. That's how high of an attack stat Blaziken has.
Does it one-shot Alolan Marowak?
Probably not, but I mean, I highly doubt it, because it double resists, right?
So what changes have you got?
Sim that out.
Knowing that I'm working on getting another Torchic, maybe replacing Fortress by any of the other. Hello?
Fortress is really the big glaring error in that team. I think if you're gonna run an anti Lapras, you run Bronzong or something else. Just because you do lose the Altaria matchup, you do lose all the fire matchups, all the fighting matchups. It's just, I'm not a fan of Fortress in this cup.
No, I mean, I just shoved it on that team because I already had it and I felt like trying it out at least before committing to anything.
Right, I get you. I'm not like dogging on the Fortress pick because it might have been good, but it's just in that lineup particular, I think you need, like we're talking, Lucario counter, a Blaziken counter, or something like that, stronger than it's just Charizard.
I think the double Earthquake users is kind of hurting that team as well, because that's really what's sort of opening it up to being vulnerable to Altaria, and as well as Luke, just because of the 2 matchups in Flygon and Fortress can't beat Lucario, but
So swapping Fortress to something like Bronzong, that would improve the Lucario and Blaziken matchup. And
I mean, they will do that for you, and they'll improve your Altaria matchup. I don't know if you're going to be weaker to opposing Earthquakes at that point, but I think you'll do better with Bronzong over Fortress. I don't know if Flygon is then needed in that one either, though.
Yeah. By the way, a Focus Blast does a little bit more than a third, almost half HP on Alolan Marowak. So, I mean, that's pretty good for double resisting. So, in case you guys were still wondering that.
Yeah, I ran the sim on that. Even with shield advantage, like Blaziken will win easily.
Yeah, but you'd be doing Brave Bird instead on Alolan Marowak. You wouldn't be Focus Blast.
Yeah, no, but yeah, Focus Blast just wrecks everything, even normal resistance like Charizards and stuff like that, if you can get it fired off. So that'll be a thing that'll happen to somebody. Burn 2 shields, get beat by Blaziken, and then lose your next one to a Focus.
Okay. So we'll move on to next team. We have Sebastian Ali. I can't pronounce that well. He's got Dragon Pulse or Ice Beam Lapras. He hasn't decided. Has both. Help me out here, he says. Blaziken, Lucario, Bastiodon, Altaria, and Bronzong. He can also run Charizard instead of Blaziken. So he's basically wanting help deciding between Blaziken or Charizard and deciding between one of the two Lapras. So.
Yeah, like I pointed out a while back, I don't like Blaziken and Bronzong on the same team. They don't have a variable coverage map that I like. I would like Charizard over that if you want to run Bronzong, just because it would get a little better. It wouldn't be hard countered by as much of the stuff.
Yeah, I mean that team I mentioned this before, I think, but it's a little vulnerable to Bronzong, I think. Despite having the mirror option, Bronzong beats Altaria and Blaziken pretty quickly. You're not really concerned with the mirror. And then Lucario, it's sort of IV dependent at one shield, but Lucario really doesn't want to fight Bronzong in a shielding situation. So I think Bronzong would be a pretty safe or possibly lead pivot for that team or against that team.
Unless you switch Blaziken to Charizard, for example, that would help a little bit.
Yep. Yeah, that would.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you switch either your Bronzong out for something else or your Blaziken out for Charizard, and then I think your team will fare better. And then really, Dragon Pulse or Ice Beam is just, what do you care more about, the mirror or Altaria?
Can I ask a quick question? What?
Yeah.
I noticed you guys always suggest Charizard as the alternative to Blaziken. Is it a reason that Marowak is always kind of like the forgotten one of the three? Does it lose some coverage that Charizard has better, other than because they both beat Blaziken, right?
So Marowak is if it's Hex, which is I think sort of the consensus moveset. It's not exactly as hard of a counter to Lucario as Charizard and Blaziken are, but it does have some other good matchups, like being able to beat Bronzong consistently. But I'm not sure exactly. Maybe that's why, it's because we're just sort of focused on replacing that hard Lucario counter with another hard Lucario counter. I don't know if you guys have some comments as well.
That's kind of my point too. Like, your fire type is usually there just to stop Lucario, and then maybe pick up a few extra fights, and Lucario running, or not Lucario, Marowak running Hex, it's not a sure thing. Like, if you don't correctly bait or predict their shield bait, you'll lose that fight. I mean, Lucario's not going to do much else after that, but it's still a loss. And then if you run Rock Smash, you're kind of like a bad Blaziken, but it's yeah, you beat Blaziken, and that's, I mean, yeah, you at best tie with Bronzong. So Hex is just better in that regard, and that's typically people bring Charizard or Blaziken to stop Lucario, and then maybe get some other coverage. And that's why we always flip back and forth between the two, rather than thinking, okay, Alolan Marowak can come in as a substitute.
I think Alolan Marowak was mentioned before as, if you're going to double up on fire, it's probably the one to double up with, alongside like a Blaziken or Charizard, depending on the team.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, because its matchup coverage is a little different than the other two.
Yeah.
Right. You'll consistently beat the Bronzong, which beats Charizard and Blaziken. I mean, more or less. You have a semi-positive matchup versus Flygon. You can beat Charizard and Blaziken. You win versus Kingdra, if depending on how relevant that becomes. And you can still win versus Lucario. You're just not going to ever touch Bastiodon unless you run Rock Smash.
And it beats the other two fires, which is good, and Blaziken and Charizard.
Spamming with Hex Bone Club, can you at least hurt the Basti though? Like, he won't come out of that fight looking good, right?
But with Hex, you don't charge it fast enough to outset the smackdown damage.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Yeah, but the Bone Club spam, you do bring up a good point in that Alolan Marowak with Hex is one of the better shield baiters, along with Flygon in all of Kingdom.
The fight with Alolan Marowak with Hex, Alolan Marowak doesn't even get a chance to do a second Bone Club starting at 0-0 before the Stone Edge comes out to just finish it off. If with a slight energy leak, you'll get a Bone Club off, but the defense is so high and Bone Club's damage is so low that even with the double damage, it really doesn't do much. It does 32 damage to Bastiodon for 35 energy from Alolan Marowak. So it doesn't hit for anything.
Yeah. The next team we have is almost the same, except he's settled for a Blaziken, and he's got Dragon Pulse on Lapras. So that's a version of the same team that instead of Charizard, he just settled for Blaziken. But we've talked about the Blaziken and Bronzong duo. Probably best to stick with the Charizard in this case if you're going to run Bronzong. One comment from the live stream chat was, if I can find it, substituting Marowak for Bronzong and Blaziken. Was it Blaziken for Charizard? I forget who said it. They deleted their comment. But basically dropping Bronzong in favor of Marowak, how would that change your decision on Blaziken or Charizard?
Like, I think we've covered this too, is if you run double fire, you could run Marowak as with either one of them. I don't think there's really a pros or cons to picking one or the other. Blaziken gets the Basti matchup, which Marowak wouldn't, so there's some nod to that.
And neither would Charizard, I guess. So.
Right.
So maybe Blaziken and Marowak together, just to pick up the fighting weaknesses that, like the Lapras and the Bastiodon and the Steelix and stuff like that, that a low Marowak just doesn't appreciate having in on the field.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I think that covers every team, unless you guys had any finishing comments about these two teams. It's just basically a ball core, and then the flex spot with Bronzong, and then the fire spot with Blaziken or Charizard.
I just had a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry guys. Back when you went to going back to my team, you guys mentioned that I should get rid of Melmetal for Steelix, and I was wondering if there was anything else that I should kind of induct into my team that would be a good counter for Lapras. That's what I'm mainly worried about when it comes to things like. That's why I brought Melmetal in there, because I know Lapras is going to be pretty common in this cup.
Melmetal doesn't beat Lapras.
Yeah.
Since Lapras is running Water Gun this cup,
yeah,
the neutral damage just beats Melmetal.
Oh, okay. And then
it really doesn't. It doesn't come out with as strong of a win as you'd think. Yeah. What Galaxy said.
It's about neutral. I mean, it's not like Melmetal loses completely, and it wins in the no shield fight. But Lapras will still appreciate taking that fight,
right?
If you're banking on Melmetal being its counter.
Gotcha. And then the reason for Steelix?
It's basically the best replacement for Bastiodon until we get Probopass.
Gotcha.
And to your point, yep, go ahead.
Steelix covers the Altaria fight, the Skarmory fight. If you see one, it covers the Bronzong fight, and it beats Bastiodon.
Gotcha. Okay, making sure.
And you were asking about how to cover that Lapras vulnerability, and that being a reason why you brought Melmetal. Potentially bring Bronzong as well, even with Steelix within your 6, to help mitigate that vulnerability. Also running Dragon Pulse on Lapras, if you're able to get one of those, that's another way to sort of sneak a matchup advantage there in the mirror.
Yeah, no, this Lapras that I'm running just has Ice Beam. I don't think I know anybody who has a Dragon Pulse Lapras around here.
Yeah, Lapras is probably the most threatening, because there are only 2 primary counters to Lapras in Lucario and Abomasnow. Everything else is a soft win or a tie at best. So, I mean, it's not like there's a whole lot of Lapras counters out there running around.
All right, yep, that was just my question, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
cool.
No problem.
Yeah.
And Juice Master asked about Skarmory, why we haven't seen any Skarmory teams, and is he really off meta?
I suppose he's just Altaria. That's the big thing.
Altaria can just demolish the fire types for the most part, just pretty much completely, unless Charizard was able to somehow farm something and just is able to spam shields down Altaria with Dragon Claw, and even then, I don't think it does that well.
No, in the concentrated meta, the only 2 fights Skarmory wins over Altaria is Frostlass and Bronzong.
And it does a little bit better against Bastiodon, but still loses pretty handily.
It loses pretty hard versus. It's not a pretty.
No, not at all. I don't expect to see a lot of Skarmory just because Altaria is already. I mean, most people that take PvP somewhat seriously, they have an Altaria already. So why not run the better of the 2? So that's why I don't expect to see that many Skarmory.
Yeah, the Skarmory losing to Power Up Punch Lucario just completely kind of keeps it out of play.
Yep.
Cool. Well, thank you so much to everybody tuning in. Thanks a lot to Polly and Gots especially for coming in and subbing out, because a lot of us weren't able to make it, especially at the beginning of the stream. And then the infographic, thanks a lot for, there was a lot of collaboration every month. It's really exciting with the new theme coming out, and we try to get this out as soon as possible, but then everybody has a good point, and then we have to make an edit, and adding Bronzong and Flygon and then removing them changed up a bunch. It's always fun to do them. It can be a little bit of a headache sometimes, especially with cups that are as complicated as this one. But it's certainly a collaborative effort, and we wouldn't be able to do it without all your guys' help. So do appreciate all you guys tuning in, and we'll be doing more team reviews leading up to tournament weekends. We'll be doing scrim matches. I believe Valor Ash will probably be doing some scrim matches later and live streaming them. And of course,
I can throw those up whenever.
Yeah. And of course, we do more live streams featured throughout the week. So do look forward to seeing your team submissions, and hopefully you guys can bring in the gold. Thanks so much for tuning in. Scotty, if you can end the stream.
I'll just assume we're off air. How was having Gots and Polymers? I was upset that I missed today's podcast.
Yeah, they were awesome.
Yeah, it was fun.
Did we get more exposure for the British people, or at least be able to cover some of their teams for our mates across the pond? Or was it still just a bunch of Americans?
Yeah, it's mostly Americans. I didn't hear any British British submissions.
There was someone who posted in the chat that said they appreciate it being more UK friendly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that. Man, I didn't know we were doing like a marathon stream today. I could have been on like an hour.